Welcome to the first episode of Ahead of the Cyber Curve, Next Generation IT Security for SMB, a three-part series by Citrix. I'm your host, Lisa Rogers, and today I am joined by Kurt Romer, Chief Security Strategist at Citrix, Caleb O'Connell, Cybersecurity Manager at Progeny, and Roger Calejo, Cybersecurity Consultant at Logic River. In this debut episode, we're exploring modernized IT for the SMB workspace, in particular, how SMBs can best enhance productivity for their hybrid workforces, enabling simple and personalized access to files and apps without leaving their organizations vulnerable to cyber threats. Thank you for being with us today. Now let's get started. Caleb, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background on this topic. What does a typical workspace look like for your clients?
Yeah, so I'm, of course, Caleb O'Connell, Cybersecurity Manager at Progeny. And one of the things we've been trying to work on in this last 18 months of kind of impromptu remote work is basically updating our policies, because we were, of course, an on-premise environment to going to a full remote workplace environment, is trying to bone up on our endpoint security, whereas, of course, cloud security is still really important. Still a huge focus. Endpoint security was, of course, a huge focus there, but now trying to focus not so much on just our on-premise, just our network security with the antivirus, anti-malware with a controlled environment, but having permanent remote, or at least semi-permanent, people being on long-term remote, being able to account for their activities, respond to their questions. Of course, support requests still come in. Remote work, which was used prior, but used much more now. Remote support, remote VPN access to systems that we need. So just addressing all of the security concerns, basically through logs and access and phone calls, emails, how we can get through to people if there is any event, and responding to alerts that way. So it was just more or less you don't have that easy touch. There's not the easy way to turn off things. You basically have to be aware of that. People are out in the wild, they're working on the things you expect them to do, and it's just all the stuff that was already there is just now the perimeters around each individual user. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Caleb. How about you, Roger?
Yeah, sure. Roger Calejo with Logic River, been consulting across the security spectrum, but focusing on identity access management for a large part of that. And what I'm seeing, or what I saw, I think is pretty common, is two areas where there's been a significant increase in SaaS adoption are productivity solutions as well as communications. So we no longer have people sitting in conference rooms writing on whiteboards. That's all been transferred to other areas. And a lot of the things that we had on premise, we no longer work outside the traditional boundary of the network, and so that's pushed the adoption to, like I said, a lot of other SaaS applications. The tie-in to that that I see is a lot of increase in federation and SSO single sign-on to be able to enable access to those places, and so the working to circle around after a significant effort with COVID to then ensure that we have security wrapped around, and then not repeating too much of what Caleb said, but largely pretty much everything that he said as well.
Thank you. And just to give you my background, I was most recently with a large orthopedic surgeon practice, and their infrastructure was very, very outdated. And either as a blessing or a curse, 2 months before COVID hit, we were hit with a ransomware attack, which caused us to have to modernize very, very quickly. We got rid of any server that was older than 2008. We went to Office 365. We went to Microsoft Exchange on the cloud. And everything I could move to the cloud, I could. So when COVID did hit, we were in a little bit better situation than we would have been. But we never actually closed. We continued to see patients, so everybody was in the office. The only remote workers were our rev cycle folks who are the ones that collect insurance payments and are dealing with the insurance companies. They didn't need to be in the office and they went remote. But because we didn't have a VPN in place, we didn't have anything like that. So what I set up for those remote workers is we had our EMR system was being hosted at a data center in Vegas and accessed through Citrix. And we just published those apps that those guys needed on the Citrix desktop so that they had access to the apps and to the internal stuff, programs. Now that made them go from Houston to Las Vegas and back to Houston again, which wasn't a good final solution, but it was what got us going and through the beginning of COVID. So this, we're looking for a solution long-term to replace that, and what was the best solution. Roderick, do you have any, sorry, Kurt, do you have any final comments or any thoughts on this?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Romer, Chief Security Strategist and a member of the Office of the CTO at Citrix. I think one of the biggest trends facing small and medium businesses right now as they take a look at security concerns is, of course, ransomware, but another big concern right behind it is the talent pool. Small and medium businesses had a major advantage prior to this work from anywhere, work from home, hybrid work model. Now they're competing with talent that might be located throughout the world and can really work for any organization. Whereas you might have had some local resources that didn't want to relocate to bigger cities or work for bigger companies, now they can do that very easily. So the security talent pool, which was already very shallow, is now maybe even more shallow for small and medium businesses. And it really drives those businesses to look to things like simplification, rationalization, and of course, automation as much as possible. A lot of what we'll be talking to today.
Thank you, Kurt. Next question. So within this increasingly hybrid workspace, what challenges are small and medium-sized businesses grappling with? What are their top pain points, or for you specifically? Caleb, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. So for our pretty rapid move to a remote workforce environment, and obviously we wanted to keep our workforce portable and mobile anyways. I mean, people oftentimes are on the road working, it's not purely just an in-office environment anyways. However, we went from having, we focused on the perimeter of the office, we focused on the security that we had there. When we would go into our cloud environments, our engineers would need access. We could work from, say, a single IP address, our office IP. That was a concern, an area of concern we would want to be able to restrict to. But now when everybody goes remote permanently like this, like I mentioned before, every single endpoint becomes your little miniature perimeter. And so while we had a VPN, it meant people relied on it more. So we had to make sure it was performant. We had to make sure that it was secured. And we had to make sure that while the user accounts were all up to date on that, we had to make sure everybody remembered their password. They had put in the correct password. Their two-factor authentication was up to date because they maybe did not have to use that for a while before that. We also had to be sure that we could communicate to the users the expectations and the procedures that were in place already. When they're remote, if they don't get a response quickly, a lot of users, they want to get their jobs done that day. And if they are stuck and they don't get an answer, they're going to try to do what they need to do to take the next step anyways. And I think in security, one of the concerns is users amazingly will find a weak point in security because they just want to get their job done. And so you just have to make sure that people are aware of the proper procedures to do things, the proper process to say if they happen to get data, how they would clean their system of that. Alert them that it's like we are going to be applying new controls that are going to restrict, say, access to certain places. So we have unsanctioned and sanctioned applications. Prior, we could log those and we could communicate to users directly, but now users, when they're home, it's a mix of personal and work at the same time. We have to remind people that there is that separation. You're not going to be able to do certain things at certain times because it's a security risk. So that was a big challenge, is making sure that users were aware of, what you used to take for granted in the office still applies when you're home, and you just have to be aware of that. And just knowing that, the things you had done when you have endpoint protection, you can focus on it pretty well. But sometimes you can lean on your office environment as well. When you take the office environment out, you really have to make sure your antivirus, any malware updates are complete. If you do phishing and ransomware training for users to recognize that, you have to make sure they're up to date with it, because people can forget. Oftentimes you can block it at a perimeter when they're at home. Who knows what internet they're using? It just becomes a lot more important that users are aware of this. So things like training, some of the basic controls you could overlook, making sure users are using multi-factor authentication. It's just a revisit of everything you would have already done, but sometimes things are missed. It's just every miss is bigger when everyone's remote.
Thank you, Caleb. And building on what Caleb was saying, Roderick, would you agree that the new perimeter is not the perimeter is no longer the firewall, but now the access management? You're on mute.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Absolutely, and we were on a certain trajectory before that already, and we've been talking about that for a long time in the industry. But COVID, increased that significantly, and a lot of the things that Caleb mentioned with around identity access management, some of the challenges of that, going to again large SaaS adoption, and some of the loss of visibility that we might have that we typically had when we work to integrate things on our on our own premise, and logging levels that we can control better, etc. I think what some of the other things he mentioned, filtering, there always wasn't a especially for SMBs a network to endpoint holistic mapping of filtering capabilities and controls, and COVID really exposed that even more to where even if you're on a VPN, sometimes the network bandwidth couldn't keep up. So some organizations were did things like split tunneling and some other things that opened up exposed endpoints that were traditionally better protected, etc. So absolutely shifting from some of those network controls that we had all to identity, both of a device as well as the user.
Thank you. From my point of view, again, in healthcare, my issues in this whole struggle was, first we had some on-prem legacy EMR systems that we had to have access to, and so trying to get access to those and still protect the environment. I was never very trusting of people's individual computers and VPNing into the system, because you don't know where that other computer's been. And I have a lot of doctors who want to use what they want to use. It doesn't matter what we tell them they should use or what we want to do. They want to go out and buy their own computer and do what they want. And since it was a physician-owned practice, we had to somehow or other make that work. And then we had the additional Hipaa compliance issues that if I allowed somebody to access from their personal computer, I needed to make sure that they could not copy patient data down onto their personal computer. It needed to stay on-prem. So we were just a lot of security issues around the Hipaa compliance. Does anybody else have any final words they want to say on that before we move on?
Yeah, I would say as well that there's really three basic areas to concentrate on. And the first is make sure that you've got your basic security hygiene covered. Even with an SMB, there are things that you absolutely have to do. Have multi-factor authentication, keep on top of patches and updates much more than you have in the past, because that window of patching has shrunk to even be within a day in many cases. And lots of the other great things brought up by the other panelists. So having that basic hygiene is absolutely key. The second is realizing that security is a shared responsibility, and talk to your workforce, talk to your supply chain, talk to your partners, and make sure that everybody understands how they integrate in the shared responsibility of security. Make it something where if people find issues, they can bring it up and they're rewarded for that. Maybe they get a lunch or a gift card if they find something rather substantial. Help them point out areas where you can improve and innovate and be more agile. And really the third area builds off of that to say, really define your culture of security for your organization and make sure that everybody understands how they fit within their culture and within those responsibilities. It's extremely important that everybody understands exactly how culture applies and that it's something that's pervasive throughout the organization.
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, I agree. Building a culture of security is essential. in any business. So what about VPNs and SSOs? Are they still enough to protect your infrastructure? Have you found needs for something different? Roger, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. Again, going back to some of the points I think Caleb hit on, we saw the shift. If you just look at where traffic was, before and after COVID, that you look a lot of bandwidth, and depending on the size of the organization and what they had available, that forced some decisions as to how networks were re-architected. And again, SaaS being a lot of times that's just not practical or feasible to jump on a VPN, hit the corporate network, and then out to a SaaS. So that's a really big, from a traffic perspective, that shift of direct to SaaS, and then the sometimes loss of visibility that you have to what exactly what happens because of robust logging and monitoring may not be there, and it's just it's not equivalent across the spectrum. So saw that as a shift and something that still needs attention.
Thank you. Caleb?
Yeah, I think using tools like VPNs and single sign-ons are great. They definitely enhance the remote work experience for people. I think, and when we think of the SMB space, because it's usually split across like enterprise, larger companies, and even in that space, there's different levels of organizations there. They may have used a tool where in office there was some control, but they don't pay for the license that gives them SSO capabilities. So then all of a sudden, when you need to have this better control over whether it's a cloud-based VPN versus part of your network, maybe you close the office permanently, so now you have to reshift your VPN solution. I think that causes teams to have to start to look, what are our alternatives? What are we trying to achieve with the tech that we're using? So VPNs, of course, are important, but having a rapid switch to maybe using a cloud-based VPN that has a different control around how you get access to it. Because then you start to ask yourself, is the VPN actually controlling the data, or is it just another level of authentication? So I think, as people have mentioned, having good logging and monitoring for the end users, so you're understanding what they're doing, that's an enhancement that doesn't usually get realized when people are remote. It's harder to collect those logs. Understanding what data they may be collecting and sending. I mean, every user, part of their job is they have to work with the data that you have. When they were in office, they were in a place where you could control the flow of the data. You knew if they were sending it someplace else. When they're remote, you have those same controls down there. So I think being able to enable users to work, VPNs of course are important, but you may have to enhance what you have because it might have shifted. Single sign-on is great, but sometimes the cost to upgrade to it or the cost to add the services license level to get to is difficult. So you have to recognize, is this now going to cost you more money to provide you more assurance? And is the tool going to be the same for you? So I think those are the challenges between those. Some companies, that's fine, but for some, that might change how they've been interacting with certain tools that they've had.
So do your workers use their own computers at home, or are they company provided computers?
They are not permitted to use their own computers for providing services. We were a laptop centric, remote capable centric company to begin with. We just had an office that people went into because we believe the office was a collaboration environment. That's where the best ideas came from. We still believe in that, but people have to be able to and being able to work from wherever. So these are all tools we had already been pursuing. COVID just made it like within a week, like, all right, now we have to mature these all. Whereas you were, as Roderick had mentioned, these were all things that had kind of been in place for a while. The concept of digital transformation that they talk about. People have been like, how can I work from everywhere? How can we, say extend our perimeter to everybody? That's been ongoing. It's just that it went from we're testing it, we're like giving it trial runs to like now it's in production all the time for everybody very quickly. So I think some people they learned where they were weak. They learned what roles weren't covering them, what services all of a sudden they couldn't access. Were shared passwords now going to be a problem versus before not so much. I think stuff like that just rapidly got surfaced in a lot of environments.
Okay, thank you. With single sign-on, I was working on a solution where, I still had people at the office seeing patients, and we had the single sign-on and multi-factor that I was implementing in order to have the security at home or even in the office. But I needed to marry that with a single sign-on for the physicians, where when they log in, it needs to log them into multiple layers of the EMR application. It needs to get them all the way to it and to save them time between patients. So trying to find a single sign-on solution for me that married those two, and when they both wanted to fight for the Windows login, was a real challenge that I'm still working on. Kurt, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, it's definitely something where single sign-on can save a lot of time, particularly in a healthcare situation, and tremendous benefits there if you're measuring it. From a VPN perspective, VPNs are for connecting trusted resources. So trusted networks to networks, trusted endpoints to networks. And it really doesn't apply very well if you're connecting untrusted devices, somebody's BYO or home-based device. So, VPNs might be a favorite of the IT department because they're typically working with trusted devices and need to be on the domain. It's definitely time to revisit your overall connectivity strategy, keeping in mind how people are working these days and what's different. Do you have BYO devices? Do you have concerns about login times? Do you have people that are accessing resources directly, going direct to the internet? Did you have to turn off split tunneling or turn on split tunneling on your VPN to be able to go ahead and get Windows updates or do Zoom calls or WebEx or GoToMeeting or whatever? All of these are issues that have to be addressed in our new modern way of working. And it does require us to look at our connectivity strategy and maybe things like cloud access security brokers, CASBs, maybe things like secure access service edge, or SASE as it's called these days, or other ways to use virtualization to keep sensitive data off of endpoints in the first place. Might be better technologies to use, or maybe a blended solution as you consider your overall connectivity strategy.
So a lot of people think that if they're using company devices at home, that solves that VPN issue. Do you agree or disagree?
Sometimes with company devices, you can continue to use a VPN, but realize that when you're doing that, you're still sending all data back and forth to the endpoint, and you're giving people access to the network. If a ransomware attack were to happen, would that allow it to be pervasive across the entire network? And so there's a risk strategy and threat landscape to take a look at behind this. VPNs may still be appropriate if you're all corporate device, but chances are you have some people on your network that can't participate completely with corporate devices.
Thank you. So how should SMBs prioritize creating an integrated digital workspace experience? How can you help? What's going on to help them alleviate the pain points that we've discussed? Do you know, Caleb? You have any ideas?
Well, I think an SMB, like a company who's trying to prioritize integrating it, you really need to bring, I think, out what's your authentication strategy, what's going to be your device management strategy, and how are you communicating and training. There's probably going to be some training. If you're using integrated training tools, probably bringing people up to speed on that. I mean, basically, people are going to work the same way they had, but they're not going to be at the desk they were in the office. So what things can they expect to not have access to? What things might they expect that they have to jump through an extra hoop? Maybe like we talked about VPNs. Are they able to use the SSO they did in the past? Maybe you hadn't enforced strong MFA every place, but now you're going to, because there might have been services where you IP restricted access to the office and you had to take that away because the VPN wasn't working correctly because like of bandwidth concerns. So now you might add more layers of complexity to get into it. So I think it's training and making sure that the tools are mature and deployed to everybody's computers for whatever those may be, whether it's a VPN, SSO, whether it's new endpoint protection. If you're going to allow BYO, so long as people understand what that means, what their liabilities and understandings of what they are allowed to do. But I just think like you need to bring people up to speed. Like the training you would have done in office needs to be updated for remote work, and people just need to understand what they can do. Most people want to do what's right, and as long as I think they understand it, they're they're fine with following what's been stated. But you got to be clear with that and offer them the tools.
Thank you. So, Rod, where should SMBs begin? Digital transformation is such a buzzword, it can seem overwhelming. So where can an SMB begin today to accelerate workspace productivity and minimize cybersecurity threat?
Sure, it's a really interesting area. So I spent a little bit of time some time in the intelligent automation space, and there are several components of that. Robotic process automation, process mining, like cognitive learning and response, machine learning, AI, the spectrum there, and you get into a lot of the things like optical character recognition and such. So a couple approaches to take there. What are your biggest pain points, or where are people spending most of their time? SMBs in the security perspective at least have typically are running a little lean, and what can they do to alleviate that? So in the robotic process automation, there's two areas that are pretty good. I don't think we hit on it yet, but with COVID, and I think even right before or around the same time frame, we had the SolarWinds breach, which massive impact. I don't think we've even quantified what exactly the damages have been to that. And one of the results we've seen is that you have your major providers that are really starting to look at their supply chains more, and that really affects the SMB landscape, and they're coming under a lot of scrutiny for compliance that they're really strained to provide. So one of the things that I've done, you can do, is taking that RPA capability and using that for two things: for identity access management, which I've done, and then also audit and compliance, going out and querying systems and making that repeatable and automated instead of having people do that. Convert that over to bots going out and doing those activities and providing both security reporting as well as audit assurance and compliance. So those are a couple of the areas that really can and you can start to work. And the nice thing about some of these tools is that they have really worked diligently to integrate a lot of these advanced capabilities that if you look at major tech companies, they've engineered all that from greenfield and ground up, where you can take a lot of what they've done pre-packaged and roll it out without a lot of the overhead or say engineering or development expertise and background. So that's something that can really help companies to move forward quickly.
What about you, Kurt? What advice would you have on SMBs and where they should start?
Yeah, I would say as well, look to automation. Automate the mundane. Find the things that you do every day and are consistent processes, and automate those to save some time. The second thing would be really look to security as a competitive advantage. Where can you enhance security and privacy and be able to use it to leverage your customers and your suppliers and your partners to prefer you as a business partner? And there's many ways to do that we've talked about here. And one of the biggest ways is to leverage analytics, and particularly security analytics, so that you have observability, insights, and automation, not just for the technology, but also for the business as well.
Thank you. So Caleb, have you had any successes in this area, and what are some of the business outcomes you've seen?
The success stories in implementing these tools. What we had done, and this came from the beginning, it was even independent of, say, going remote, but because we have a lot of users and they have a variety of tasks, like we're a healthcare related company, so there are going to be users who work with PHI at times, and there are going to be other users who work in sales, they work in marketing, they work in accounts. When they're in office, most people, they can communicate with each other, they can just talk with each other more directly. But when they're remote, things like email or transferring documents, sharing on SharePoint, all of a sudden become much more relied upon. And so using tools like data leak prevention tools. So we had those tools already in place. They needed to be matured because we realized they were going to be leveraged a lot more. So making sure that the tools we had were developed completely so we knew what people were doing. And like I said, this goes back to the communication piece. It's okay to communicate or send emails or share files with people within the company or even with certain partners, but we have to make sure that they're at times going to get notified or blocked from doing certain things that maybe weren't as hard in the past because we don't have control over that. That means there could be false positives. This goes back to your monitoring and your analytics answer, Kurt. You have to understand when you have these tools rolled out, a lot of them have the ability to report back to you what's happening. And those shouldn't just be reports that ping out arbitrary emails. You should follow up on them. You should look at the activity that's going on. You can proactively make these tools better, kind of stop false positives before they start happening. But having those controls in place mean that you can kind of let people work a little bit more freely because you can operate knowing that you're aware of when things are going on. You can catch things at least somewhat when they're happening and it was a violation of a policy. And it should also come in with, like, again, the communication, like reminding people these are our policies. They haven't changed from when we were in office. They still apply. We know that you're going to be using tools slightly different than you did before. But taking advantage of tools you have, I'm sure a lot of small businesses have tools they've paid for because they had to and probably didn't have time to roll out all the features. So look to what you can already leverage. And like you said, monitoring and analytics are good because you can start to understand what's happening, predict things going on, and you might be able to actually proactively fix things before you start having users say, hey, this is broken, I'm not able to do this, I'm not able to be productive.
Thank you. Not on that level, but one of the successes that we actually had is because we had just rolled out Office 365 by using OneDrive, SharePoint, and the Teams platform. We were very quickly able to collaborate remotely with our teams and also protect the patient data. The security aspects of those tools do keep the patient data secure and keep them from downloading it to their own devices and such like. So it was fortuitous that we rolled it out when we did. And then as you commented, Caleb, the implementation and the feature rollout went a lot faster than we thought we were going to have to. But it did provide us kind of a secure environment for those people who were remote to be able to communicate within the office. So, so looking forward, what trends do you think we'll see continuing to accelerate that are especially relevant to the small and medium business? Roderick?
Thanks, Lisa. So I think when we look at, again, sorry to keep focusing on this, but I think our, multi-cloud and SaaS adoption rates are going to continue to climb. I think, for years and years, organizations have spent a lot of time and effort working to get to a single pane of glass to be able to see everything and all that. And as we're embracing cloud more, everyone across the board, and some smaller companies from the start, the startup communities are leveraging that. So as we do that more, it seems like I see the tooling and the necessity to get multi-cloud and multi-SaaS, management, harmonization and integration. I think there's a lot of effort to be done there. A lot of vendors in that space coming out, and a lot of attention being put there as well, to be able to take all the advantages of these different applications and areas and combine them and get back to where we can have better visibility and management of our entire ecosystem and not just a single environment, which we a lot of places had some time ago.
I agree. I was moving everything I could to a SaaS environment. I moved our radiology system. I moved our faxing to SaaS. I mean, whatever I could get to SaaS in a secure way was one less thing that we had to worry about the internal infrastructure protecting. So that I agree with that, Roderick. How about you, Caleb?
Yeah, I agree. I think cloud services are going to accelerate. If they haven't already been in place, you're going to see much more adoption and much more maturity in those environments, which makes sense. I think companies that had maybe thought about single sign-on are going to rapidly adopt it. I think one of the risks you're going to see are you might start to see shared credentials crop up. So people are going to start asking about password managers, enterprise versions of those, and there's going to be management of that. I think people are going to start seeing, you'll start to see probably some consulting work being done around how do we handle a lot of these training and procedural problems. Like there's been anti-phishing campaign trainings, there's been how you do security awareness training. I think there'll be some enhancements to that training, like you can teach people how to operate in an office, but you're going to have to start teaching people here's how you operate within the digital environment that you're being granted access to. So you'll start to see people have to be trained on what exactly is multi-factor, how do you use something beyond just SMS, multi-factor authentication. People will start to want to use their personal devices more. So I think you're going to see a big push towards people getting better BYOD management tools. I know a lot of the systems already have those, but people don't tend to turn them on or don't tend to tune them. So there's going to be rapid appeal to say, let's make sure people can do more work on their phone because they're remote, they're going to be working at home all day, but home also means in their backyard, at the coffee shop, whatever. So being able to get email or read a document on their phone is going to be important, so that they're going to want to have those policies put in place. Maybe it's been ignored in the past. I think things like that are going to rapidly force their way, particularly for smaller companies who hadn't been prepared to address those yet.
I was actually looking at kind of a VDI type solution for the bring your own device. The doctors that wanted to do their own, just give them a company device, but in the cloud, and let them connect with whatever they wanted to and do what they wanted. So that was one solution I was looking at. Kurt, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think in addition to the great points already raised, integration is going to be absolutely key. We can't have all of these systems and all these applications operating independently and controlled independently. We've really got to be bringing them together, and it can be VDI or into a workspace or many other ways, but find a way to bring the power of all of these systems together so that they're easier to manage, they're easier to work with, and talk to your vendors about interoperability and your partners about how you can increase it. That will give you increased leverage.
So, Roger, I'll start with you again. If there's one key takeaway regarding securely accelerating the small and medium business workspace, what would you want every viewer to walk away with?
Sure. So I think we've discussed it. I think just about everybody on the panel has, focusing identity and access management. So when you look at breach reports and, identity-related problems are up there 80 to 95% of the time and are used. So those are, we really need to focus on that identity, whether it's the identity of the device or the individual being our perimeter. Pushing passwordless as much as we can to get away from a lot of the reset activity and all the other password related problems that we will really transform and secure, and a lot of times that passwordless is married with some type of advanced MFA, and that's another obviously necessary and good step to get to a place where. And not every MFA, is created equal either. You mentioned SMS, but that's been deprecated for several years now from NIST. But looking for, very strong MFA, and then as we, look for within the identity sphere, look at roles and what any individual user or service account or credential has access to. Consider the blast radius that has and work to isolate that. So, as ransomware attacks continue and other, malware that you can isolate, your user population from server population from core service, et cetera, and being able to minimize that. So this identity, and I hit, kind of cheated a little bit there and hit a few, but those are what I see, and those are, will pay like significant returns on those investments.
Thank you, Roger. Caleb.
Yeah, I think what's going to be big for people is they're going to have to adopt remote environments. It's here, people are going to expect it. Whether businesses want to have in office, there's going to be this expectation of a hybrid environment. So whatever you've had to do to prepare yourself for the past year, assume that's the norm going forward. That's going to give you better access to talent, as was brought up. This is going to be a true neutralizer for talent across the country. If you want to find people, you're going to have to give them these options. You also need to make sure that people understand what they have access to for tools when they go someplace. So you might find a product that works really well, but it might be an edge case scenario, maybe not well adopted. So that means it's going to be a lot of training, and you might actually alienate candidates when they come in if you're adopting some of these smaller style technologies. So it's a good idea to stick with ones that are proven, that you've seen or worked with before. And I think another irony here is that the companies that can benefit from like very expansive ideas, like say zero trust or comprehensive like device management controls or these other things, are smaller companies that are least able to implement them because of cost structures. So I think trying to figure out like where your limits are and understanding what you can afford to do, but kind of go as far as you can to achieve that. Have a plan. It's like, here's how we mature and do these things. So that when you are bringing on people and they do want to be remote or they want to have a hybrid workforce, you can confidently tell them, here's your machine, here are your tasks, you can do these things, and they're going to follow exactly the policies you want, and people are going to be happy. I just think it has a lot of benefit for the company, and you start to, expand what your opportunities are for people. But I think that, just understanding that remote is here, it's going to be around, it's going to stay, and you're going to have to address it using either tools or procedures that you've put in place in the past year, mature them, make them better, get the training that people need, make sure you're enabling like proper identity controls, proper MFA, make sure you have proper controls in place, because it's only going to grow.
I agree with both of you, and I will add one more from my perspective, working with a lot of smaller healthcare companies. Technology changes, technology moves. You've got to keep modernizing. Don't ever be satisfied with where you are and think that you're done. IT is never a done thing, because the bad guys learn and our tools get better. And if you get stuck, then you're gonna have severe security concerns. So as painful as it may be for the business, there's a need to stay current with what's going on and to continue to modernize your infrastructure. So that's my 2 cents. Kurt, would you like to take us home here? Wrap it up?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. And expanding on your comments, as we get out and talk to a lot of people who are responsible for small and medium businesses, it's clear that they've got a lot of hopes and dreams and concerns. And one of the biggest concerns, of course, is security. And taking a look at security, it's going to be extremely important that we think about innovation moving forward. It can be difficult to think about innovation when you're saddled with a lot of legacy baggage and you've got technical debt. And so I'd welcome everybody to take a look at your information technology decisions as an investment portfolio. Every once in a while, you go through and rebalance and get rid of things that aren't performing based on your plan. You need to do that in terms of information technology. It will really help you go ahead and innovate. It'll help you provide for a superior experience. And instead of just thinking about putting security technologies out there, think about how you can deliver a security experience that's really going to help modernize your workforce and really help all of us be participating in the shared responsibility of security. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. And thank you for attending the first episode of Ahead of the Cyber Curve, Next Gen IT Security for the Small and Medium Business. And thank you, Kurt, Caleb, and Roger for joining us and sharing your perspectives and insights. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.